we inform.
Religious freedom is about people of faith being able to live out their faith, live out their convictions, no matter where they are.
We equip.
Sacred honor is the courage to speak truth, to live out your free speech.
We also rejoice in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome to The Core here on American Family Radio. Walker Wildmon here with you on this edition of At the Core. Glad to be with you. The show's hosted each week by myself and Rick Green. And I'm with you most Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Rick's with you on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Speaking of Rick, I was with him this week in Aledo, Texas at the Wall Builders Library, recording a brand new episode of AFA at Home, One Nation Under God, celebrating America's 250th anniversary. We recorded that at the Wall Builders Library in Aledo, Texas. And that's going to be released on July 4th. On July 4th, Independence Day, we're going to release that 90-plus minute episode with Stephen McDowell, Rick Green, and Tim Barton. Of course, I'm on there as well. I do a lot less talking, but nonetheless, that's going to be released here in the next few months as we head into July 4th. And so be on the lookout for that. You're going to enjoy that, I hope. And we cover a lot of American history, a lot of the whys behind American history. That's all coming up on our latest episode of AFA at Home. We're going to release it to the general public, to the masses, on July 4th, 2026. Let's turn our attention to the scripture. John chapter 15 is where we are this week. John chapter 15, verses 18 and 19. If the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. Yet because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. That's verses 18 and 19 of John chapter 15. So when believers face difficulty, trials, and opposition from the world and from the unbelieving populace, should we be surprised? Should we be shocked? Should we be discouraged? Absolutely not. Jesus was the foremost person to be hated by the world, thus they crucified him. And so as believers, we should expect similar opposition and hatred from the world because they are blinded from seeing the truth of God's word. And of course, our goal as believers is to help open the eyes of the unbelieving world by sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ and teaching the whole counsel of God's word. John chapter 15, verse 18 and 19. Well, we're going to various places. Speaking of America's 250th anniversary, we're going to some of these key historical sites where America's founding history took place, was carried out. We're going to Williamsburg, Jamestown, and Yorktown. That's one trip. Colonial Williamsburg, Jamestown, and Yorktown. We're going there in June. My brother Wesley and I were leading a group there in June of this year. We're also going to Washington, D.C. In June. Of course, both the Washington and Williamsburg portion will be repeated in September. And then lastly, we're going to Boston. We're going to be walking the Freedom Trail for an entire day. We're going to be going over to Plymouth Rock. We're going to Lexington Concord. We're going to James Adams Home and State Park. And so there's just a lot that we're going to see up in Boston. This will be our second time there here in 2026. So if you want to go on any of those trips, what better time, what better year to do it than the 250th birthday of America? So that's what we're doing this year. And if you go with us in June to Williamsburg or Washington, you're going to be there just weeks before the 250th in June. So you're going to be there just weeks before the 250th anniversary there in Williamsburg and Washington, D.C. So go over to tours.afa.net, tours.afa.net to check out all the information, the itinerary, the pricing for our trips to Williamsburg and Washington, D.C., and then later in the year, Boston, Massachusetts, and other places around the Boston area. Tours.afa.net. Well, let's jump right into a little bit of economic news, and then we'll talk some cultural issues, maybe some foreign affairs, and then we'll have Chris on the last segment. Let's play this CNBC report of the jobs numbers doubling past expectations just a couple weeks ago. Clip one.
Hi, good morning, Kelly. Yes, it's Jobs Wednesday. Not necessarily a Friday, but every bit as important. Non-farm payrolls for January coming in twice expectations at 130,000. 130K. That would be the juiciest going back to April of last year when it was 158.
Rather excited about the doubling of expectations, doubling past expectations of the jobs report just out last week. All indications are showing, folks, that we're on a recovery path. All right. All indications are showing we're fully on a recovery path. There are no indications showing otherwise. There are absolutely no indications showing that the economy is headed in the wrong direction. Absolutely not the case. You look at inflation going down. You look at real wage growth going up. Tariff revenue coming in. Zero, absolutely zero indication or data to suggest that tariffs are causing inflation to go up. Inflation is dropping like a rock. And we talked a little bit last week with Chris about this. The Bureau of Labor Statistics and the data that the Fed is relying on in inflation is way behind. A recent study I saw showed that the Fed is relying on data that is anywhere from 60 to 90 days old when they're making decisions. But you've got these private metrics out there like Trueflation that is showing inflation well below the 2% threshold, well below the 2% benchmark. Some indications are showing inflation below 1%, which hasn't happened in years. And so President Trump has virtually defeated inflation. Wages are beginning to rise again. And he's bringing down spending. And so things are looking good on the economic front, despite what everyone says. And of course, we ought to be reminded the damage that Biden did to the economy was disastrous. You do not recover from that fully in a 12-month period. And so pair your expectations accordingly, that what took multiple years to mess up will take several years to rebuild. And that's what President Trump and his administration are currently doing. Let's talk another issue, and that is congressional inaction. Congressional inaction. We're heading into midterms, and getting Congress to do anything positive is like pulling teeth. As a matter of fact, it's actually harder than pulling teeth. Congress, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, they get in there and they promise all these grand things, and they do absolutely nothing. And if we want to be technical, they do absolutely minimal. They do minimal necessary to basically stay alive in Washington, D.C., and it causes voters to be frustrated. And it's voters both Democrat and Republican. This is a bipartisan problem. The politicians, they talk a big game, promise all these things. They get in Washington, and they come up with every excuse under the sun as to why they can't do what they said they were going to do. And this passing the Save America Act over in the Senate is just Exhibit A. Just pass the legislation. But Senator Thune and the Republicans, they gotta moan and groan and come up with all the reasons why they can't pass the Save America Act. Oh, we got the filibuster. Oh, we got the cloture rule. Oh, Senate tradition. Oh, what if the Democrats do this? It's as if they don't think America is truly at a pivotal moment. It is as if they think that we're just in this routine status quo environment where, first do no harm. And so they just get frozen. They don't do anything. They act as if there's not any problems. And then they wonder why voters get frustrated. We wonder why Republicans And the enthusiasm gap with the Democrats is so broad heading into the midterms is because the Republicans get to Washington and do absolutely minimal necessary to stay afloat. Okay, we passed the one big beautiful bill. Good for you. I'm glad we did. That's one piece of legislation. You guys are going to be in charge for the next 12 months, 11 months going into January. You've got to do more. Got to do more. And I'm not the only one picking up on this. Governor Kevin Stitt out of Oklahoma was actually hosting a panel with Politico recently and talking about how congressional inaction with both parties absolutely frustrates voters, and it actually runs contradictory to what the Founding Fathers intended. This is going to be clip 3. Let's listen.
My goal in my last year as governor is to make sure that I'm joyful, that I'm the light, that I don't get bitter, because politics has a way of just beating you down over time. And so I can't even imagine being the President of the United States. So it is, he's got a tough job to do, and you'd have to ask him those questions. But I think the American people want a president to give us real solutions, right? Let's stop the fighting. What are the real solutions? I tell people, some of my friends, when I'm back home, I'm like, it feels like we're a car racing towards a cliff. And right now, my party's driving, and the Democratic Party's in the passenger seat, and we're fighting over the control of the radio. And our car is racing towards the cliff here. And then, in 3 years, we may have a Democrat driving, and the Republicans will be in the passenger. And we'll still be fighting over what's on the radio. Congress is not getting anything done. We haven't passed a balanced budget in Congress since the 90s. Right. Bill Clinton was the last time that we actually had a balanced budget.
A former governor.
So we literally have a crisis that's facing us, and nobody seems to be talking about it. So those are the things I think the American people want solutions on.
Just to let me give you a sneak peek, all right, into our episode 9 of AFA at Home. One of the questions I asked the panel, including Stephen McDowell, Tim Barton, and Rick Green, was which branch of government is either most closely aligned to what the founders intended currently today, or maybe has drifted the furthest from where the Founding Fathers intended. And the branch that came up the most was the legislative. The branch that came up the most was Congress. And here's why. Let's say most, if not all, actually, let's say all, and I can defend that. All of the problems with how Washington functions today boil down to Congress. That's a defensible fact. And here's why. If I moan and groan about the executive branch, well, guess who holds the executive branch accountable? Legislative branch. If I moan and groan about the judges, the bad judges, well, guess who holds the judicial branch accountable? The legislative branch. So all roads, per the Constitution and checks and balances, point back to Congress. And I've actually been wrong before, well, multiple times. But one time I was notably wrong was when I called the 3 branches of government co-equal. And Tim Barton actually fact-checked me or corrected me on this. The 3 branches technically are not co-equal. The legislative branch, i.e. Congress, is the superior branch above all. Why? Because Congress has the authority to fire judges. Congress has the authority to fire the president via impeachment. So, ultimate authority, ultimate accountability, ultimate power in Washington, D.C. rest in the hands of Congress, the legislative branch. We'll be back in a few.
At the Core podcasts are available at afr.net. Now, back to At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to The Core here on American Family Radio. Second segment now underway on this edition of the program. As a reminder, we're going to have Chris Woodward in the last segment, as we do each Friday. Glad to have you with us here on AFR. We would greatly appreciate it if our listening audience subscribe to the podcast. Subscribing to the podcast not only brings the content directly to your device, but it also helps us spread the word about American Family Radio and about At the Core radio programs. So if you go to your podcast library on your smart device, on your tablet, on your phone, just type in the name of the program, At the Core. When my show queues up there in your library, all you have to do is click the subscribe button, and the program, the latest episode, will be queued up there, right there on your device in your library for your podcast. It's free, no gimmicks, no tricks. All you have to do is click the follow or the subscribe button in your podcast library. Another way to keep up with the program is via the AFR app, the American Family Radio app, available on all major app platforms. Just type in AFR or American Family Radio. And lastly, we keep the video up on Facebook, on all our major Facebook channels, and over at stream.afa.net. You can watch the show on all those major platforms. All right, let's talk a little bit about this study that just came out about young men flocking back to church, back to Christianity. And let's, before we play this clip, let's set up the cultural context in which studies like this take place in. All right. And so we have in the 60s and 70s, we have the rise of feminism. And what once started as feminism and women's rights, such as the right to vote, which goes obviously back well before that, but nonetheless, it's considered part of the feminist movement. What started out as women's rights, basic women's rights, hey, women ought to have the same access to things as men in society, jobs, etc., voting. What started out as that, which many people could agree to, hey, this is a noble thing. What started out as what most would consider a noble thing was at some point over the last 30 to 40 years, at some point it was hijacked. And traditional feminism morphed into modern feminism, which is an uber-left, godless ideology as it stands today. And they began making men toxic. And men were shamed, men were called toxic, masculinity was frowned upon, traditional marriage was shunned, scriptural passages talking about the male-female created order and the marital union were shunned, even by professing Christians. Oh, men don't have authority over women in the household. There's no way God would intend that. And so the questioning and the undermining of even God's authority and God's clear teachings in Scripture on the male-female relationship, including the head of the household and the spiritual leader in the marital union being the man, which is a clear biblical teaching in Christianity, virtually unchallenged for 2,000 years, has all of a sudden come up for debate. And the way these debates take place is very demeaning, and it's done in a way that's unserious. The end result is not to have serious conversation about theology or about God's created order and who should be leading the church, whether men or women should be pastors. This was not a genuine theological debate where both sides wanted to end at a place that was right and true. All of this cultural feminism over the last 30 to 40 years has been intended to tear down the Judeo-Christian order of society. And so now we're in a place, and we have been for some while, this is not breaking news, where women don't trust men. They're actually told they don't need men to be successful. Having children has been pitched as this optional add-on accessory of marriage. Well, you can get married, but of course you don't have to be fruitful and multiply. And so there's all these worldly ideals rooted in cultural feminism that are 100% anti-God that have been permeating American society for decades. Thus, we have a below 2% population rate, reproduction rate, and have had that for 40 to 50 years, going back to the 60s and 70s. But finally, it is appearing that younger generations are beginning to wake up to the fact that the world's ways don't work. And shunning masculinity doesn't work. And that God's created order of male and female is good, and it complements. And so the latest study is showing that young men are actually flocking back to church, back to Christian faith, and back to traditional values that built this nation. Let's listen to this Fox report. This is going to be clip 2. Let's listen.
Young men report feeling culturally dislocated or villainized by progressive secular discourse regarding masculinity. Traditional forms of Christianity, particularly Catholicism and Orthodoxy, offer a narrative of responsibility, sacrifice, and hierarchy that appeals to men seeking a defined role in a fluid world. Now, the report also breaks down weekly religious attendance by education level, and those with postgraduate degrees are at 30%. People with bachelor's degrees, 28%. Emily, to add to this a little bit, okay, it's a worldwide phenomenon. 45% increase in the number of people baptized in France. In the UK, they have seen 18 to 24-year-olds jump from 4% believers and attending church in 2018 to 16%. But I love this. Most of this growth is concentrated among Catholics and Pentecostals. A shout out to my evangelical crowd there.
That's a report out of Fox News talking about young men flocking back to church, particularly to Christianity. A couple different denominations at play here. But nonetheless, the point here is that young men are to the place where they understand that the cultural feminism movement and the current environment has utterly failed them. And what's interesting is that some women are actually realizing the same thing, not at the same rates as men per the studies. But young women are also realizing that the feminist movement has utterly failed them. This trend of never getting married, or waiting till you're 35 to be married and then 40 to have kids, or 40 to get married with the goal of never having children, all of this narrative of self, me, is falling apart before our very eyes. Do you want to know why? We're at record levels of anxiety and depression. Record levels of loneliness. And you know what young people are doing? They're looking around and they're looking at older generations and they're saying to themselves, some of the happiest people on the planet are the ones that married young and had a plethora of children and lived an abundant life, not from worldly standards, but from godly standards. And the fundamental teachings of Scripture, going back to the book of Genesis, are once again turning out to be the right way. And of course, we know it's always been the right way. There's no time in history where God's way is the wrong way and then the right way. But my point is that there are seasons throughout human history where even the unbelieving world recognizes that God's created order is the best order for human flourishing. And so, as Charlie Kirk was once quoted saying, get married, have kids, work hard, raise a family. When you examine all these studies out there of young people, some of the most unhappy people in this world, especially in America, with materialism, social media, all the entertainment you could bargain for, the most unhappy people are the singles or the marrieds with no kids, working 12 hours a day to earn all this money and have all these things and do all these trips. And then they get to the middle of their life and they look around and all they have is a bunch of stuff and thousands of hours poured into corporate America. One of the most sad things that I see just looking at life is when I run into people that have no family. And you say to yourself, how do you have no family? Well, there's a couple ways, but I'm talking about immediate family, okay? If we want to be technical here. I'm talking about siblings and children, spouses. That's what I'm talking about. And what happens is when people go down this path of, oh, no, I don't want to get married right now. I want to get 10 years into my career before I get married. Or, well, I want to get married, but I don't want to have kids right now. I want to wait till I'm, quote, settled down to have kids. And then, boom, you blink and you're 40. Boom, you blink and you're 45. This is leaving. There's no doubt about this. This is undisputed. This worldly way of thinking of me, self, is leaving a lot of people currently and in the future very lonely. And all these doctors and psychologists, they act as if this is rocket science. And the doctors and psychologists, they prescribe all the medicine, they recommend all the counseling sessions. But when you look at all the studies out there, some of the surest ways to bring about joy and happiness and contentment in someone's life is for them to get married, for them to have children, for them to raise a family, and contribute to society, and work hard. Have a successful career. Be happy with what you do for a living. Build generational wealth, generational opportunity. And so young people are flocking back to that. They're flocking back to what worked for previous generations. And it's so very encouraging to see. So very encouraging to see. So glad to report that study coming to you from Fox News on young men flocking back to church. Bobby, how much time we got left for this segment? 4 minutes? Okay. Let's play a clip here, and then we'll wrap this up. This clip's quite a bit of a vibe shift here. We're going to go to the Holman clip. This is about illegal immigrants and what they're doing to young girls here. And I want to play this. Viewer discretion advised, listener discretion advised. If you got young ears in the car, you probably want to turn this off. But this is Tom Holman, the ICE border czar, talking about what they're discovering when they're arresting these cartel members and these gang members, what they're doing to young girls when it comes to illegal immigration and human trafficking. Clip.
Out now, we're showing up at parking lots, vacant homes, but we're not going to give up to every one of these kids are found. So we just found one 2 days ago, an example, 14-year-old little girl living with 2 adult males who trafficked her, and we found her she's pregnant from trafficking, being forced into prostitution. 14 years old. So we're taking care of her, both physically and mentally. Despite what the media says, we're not heartless. We care about these kids. I'm a father. And the reason I'm so emotional and so headstrong on this issue, because I dealt with dying children throughout my career. I've held dying children. I've held dead children. I talked to little girls as young as 9 that were raped multiple times by the criminal cartels. I'll never forget it. When you get on your knees to talk to a 9-year-old little girl, everything innocent and pure is ripped from her, and she don't believe in humanity anymore because you had a bunch of animals crawling on her and taking everything pure from her. You'll never forget it. And that shit's happening every day through this trafficking, and we're going to put an end to it. Everything we can do. So 4 years.
Speaking to Republican governors and lawyers at the Republican Lawyers Association. The reason I want to play that, it's hard to listen to. Nobody wants to listen to that kind of news, that kind of talk about what's going on. But folks, we have to understand, and I know most of you do. If you listen to American Family Radio, you're mostly up to speed on this stuff. But when Democrats, members of the media, so-called journalists, these radical left activists, when they defend illegal immigrants en masse, when they protest and block ICE operations in Minneapolis, they are de facto defending these sick individuals. The Democrat Party has become the largest lobbying operation for these cartel rapists. And so as you go to the ballot box in November, as you consider which leaders you're going to pick, just remember that clip. Remember that Democrat governors, mayors, and congressmen are lobbying for the cartel rapists to stay in America. That's what this is all about.
At the Core podcast are available at AFR.net. Now, back to At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to the Core here on American Family Radio. Chris Woodward is with us, as he is each week, each Friday. Chris, welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Well, Chris, we've got a lot to talk about, a lot of economy.
Mm-hmm.
We'll start off with the economic news. Maybe we'll end talking about Iran and maybe the economic implications on that front, which looks pretty imminent as far as the U.S. move on Iran.
Mm-hmm.
But tell us what's going on maybe in the mortgage market or with home construction. What do you have over there?
Well, this one is involving housing starts, so new construction for housing plans. And this is Market Watch's headline. Housing starts jump to highest level in 5 months, showing momentum going into the new year. I think we're going to hear a lot from the president next week during the State of the Union when it comes to things like housing because of a couple of reasons. Number one, we have a housing shortage in America. We have a lot of people. We don't have places to put them. And two, a lot of people, as we have talked about on the show, can't afford a home or can't afford another home to maybe move their growing family into due to a whole cost of factors, all of which involve decisions by the president and members of Congress. So it's good news for housing, and I do think we're going to hear a lot from the president. The State of the Union is next Tuesday, and some are saying that we should expect the longest one in history.
The longest shutdown?
The longest State of the Union.
Oh, okay. Because they're also debating a shutdown. I thought, well, the longest shutdown.
Hopefully it's not the largest shutdown.
We just did a few months. We just did 30 days a few months ago.
Yes.
We'll see how that goes. Yeah, the longest. Okay. Didn't President Trump, wasn't his last one the longest?
It was one of the longest for sure. I mean, I can remember one back in like the 90s when Gingrich was running Congress. Bill Clinton was in the White House. That one was pretty lengthy. There have been a few, but this one most recently, I think it was the most painful just because we have a bigger population. Government has grown. There was a whole bunch of people not being paid.
So let me ask you this on the State of the Union. President Trump doesn't miss an opportunity to make history.
That's very true. Very true.
But if you want to do the longest, you're talking 2 hours.
Well, one thing that I would recommend as a tax-paying American is that members of Congress would stop interrupting whoever the president is to cheer or boo. Just let him or her give their spiel and let us all get back to our
You wonder if
program.
if that's counted.
Yeah,
like the number of cheers.
I think it does.
Yeah.
Somebody does. I mean, there's a
remember,
lot of praise.
Remember
there.
last year they had Mike Johnson had to get somebody kicked out.
Right. Yeah, that was a congressman from Texas.
Yeah,
and that delayed the proceedings even further.
Green, is his
Al
last
Green.
name. Yeah. Well,
That feels like 5 years ago.
here's what I'm thinking, Chris. I wonder if we're even going to have a State of the Union.
Well,
I think if we're bombing Iran, I don't think we have a State of the Union.
I was about to joke that I wonder if Iran's going to be the 52nd state come Tuesday. But you're right. That is a big one.
Yeah, I'll be surprised if we have a State of the Union. Should we do something on Iran between now and then?
Very true.
Could be delayed, but maybe they'll wait until after. Who knows? Chris, you were talking earlier going into the program about the new house starts.
Yes.
That plays into the mortgage rates and affordability. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, mortgage rates have obviously been an issue, again, because of rates and the fact that a lot of people can't afford a home. People that might be able to sell a home, they need some money to be able to buy another home, and that's been a big issue. I drive past half a dozen houses that have been on the market for months, some for a year or more, and a lot of it is a price issue. So the government needs to do things to make it more affordable for a home buyer. I know the president has thrown out a lot of ideas. Some of them have been crazy. You have like the 50-year mortgage idea, but then you have the tap into your 401k to get some money to put down on a house. There are some things out there, and who knows, maybe the president's going to talk about that in the State of the Union, whenever it is.
Yeah.
But definitely one of the things that he is going to say is, I have done things to help make things cheaper and put more money in your pocket so that if you're in that situation and maybe you're saving for a home, you will have some more money this year and going forward due to the tax cuts and the One Big Beautiful Bill.
Yeah, and there are, I want to be honest, well, we always want to be honest. I want to be fair on the mortgage side of things. There are first-time home buyer programs out there, like FHA. So if you're a first-time home buyer, there are zero-down programs out there for you. Mm-hmm. But to your point, I think the two things that are going to make the most impact is not necessarily, meddling around with, like, how do you help people get a down payment, stuff like that. I think the biggest help is going to be the rates and the prices. Now, obviously, that seems obvious, but it's the simple stuff that people have been talking about for decades. That's the rates and the prices. I think if you get rates down in the 4% range on the mortgage side, they're at 6 now. They're actually at the lowest level in multiple years. If you get rates back down in the 4% range and you boost supply, that's going to open the door for hundreds of thousands of home buyers to get back in the market. And I don't think we're far off from that. I mean, I think we're probably 12 months off from that. If you get a new Fed chair, you drive down rates. If we're being honest, Chris, inflation isn't a problem anymore.
No, it's really not.
I mean, you can cite a few categories like beef, but broadly speaking, inflation, fundamental or like entrenched inflation is not even a thing anymore. And as you and I talked about last week, when you look at like Trueflation, which is a private tracker, they're showing inflation below 1% in some categories. So if inflation isn't a thing anymore, isn't a problem anymore, the Fed can drop rates pretty drastically.
Right. I think one of the things that the president should do, or somebody that works for the administration in all of these economic speeches, is basically show some charts, some visual aids, and explain to people where we were under Biden, where we are now, what we've done to bring things down from Biden, all kinds of things. It's a very numbers intensive topic, and you will lose people in the weeds because it is kind of a in the weeds issue. But throw out some visual aids and show people where we were, where we are today, where we will be when these things continue down the road under my policies, and why you should vote for me and Republicans in the midterm elections. The reason why you need to do that is we've all heard from Donald Trump for years now that Joe Biden was terrible and Kamala was a terrible candidate and all that other stuff. We know where you are on Joe Biden, but you need to show Americans how they have benefited from the year plus that you've been in office, and why these things will only get better if you continue to vote for people that will support my agenda. Because right now, Democrats are out there with this misleading campaign that Donald Trump said he would bring prices down on day one, and he lied. That's my Elizabeth Warren impression that I will never do again.
Yeah.
But and those kinds of claims go like unchallenged. They make it on MS Now. They make it on CNN. They make it 500 million people around the world through X. And the administration needs to do a really good and clear job of explaining how we have benefited from his short time in office.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree that's the winning message. I also think the winning message on the midterms, which I think the State of the Union is probably going to be a kind of an opening salvo into the midterm messaging. The question that the American people have to answer this November, yes, President Trump's not on the ballot, but in a sense, his presidency is, his agenda is. The question before us is, do we want 2 more years, I'm talking about a year from now, do we want the remaining 2 years of the Trump presidency to be spent on wall-to-wall coverage of impeachments?
Yeah.
And wall-to-wall coverage on government shutdowns and wall-to-wall coverage on how Congress and the White House can't agree on funding. Because virtually that's what you're signing up for. Mm-hmm. And I think if the American people are being honest, I'm not sure that's where the appetite is. But unfortunately, Chris, the enthusiasm gap with the Democrat base and the Republican base, the Democrats are outpacing the Republicans on enthusiasm this election cycle.
Yeah.
The never Trump, hate Trump vote is strong, and we can't forget that. I think President Trump needs to pay attention to that.
Right. I think that's one of the reasons why somebody in the White House or in the War Room is saying, Mr. President, we really just have to make this about the economy. Because the ICE stuff has put a bad taste in some people's mouth.
Yeah.
And then you've got, immigration. That was a story a couple of days ago about how Trump himself has been told, hey, the immigration crackdown has caused home buying or home building to be an issue because now contractors are not finding workers to climb on top of a house and build some stuff. And certainly there's a number of other service industries. So I think that's why the administration has tried to make this about the economy. I would also recommend that you get somebody from the education department out there to push trade schools and other things, and also give America the swift kick in the pants that it needs to teach young people that we need to work and we need to provide for ourselves and this country, because unfortunately we've trained up a couple of generations now, including mine, to just always depend on government to help you, and that job is beneath you. We need to work. We need a better work ethic as a society.
Yeah. If you want, to me, this disconnect between presidential cycles and midterm cycles, it's just quite fascinating. I guess when their person gets in charge, so to speak, for lack of a better way to describe it, I guess this kind of lackadaisical, kind of nonchalant, everything is good mentality takes over. I mean, that's really the only way to explain it, because otherwise it doesn't make sense how, should Republicans lose the House, it doesn't make sense how the president wins the popular vote in all swing states and then turn around 2 years later and then you lose the House of Representatives. Mm-hmm. Now, I will say the congressional makeup and these congressional maps are all over the place. With this redistricting, you've got, Virginia, for example, this is why Indiana's got to step it up. There's no reason Indiana should not have redistrict. The rhinos there, they're so weak. But Virginia Democrats ran on a, quote, moderate message, and that's putting it lightly. They ran on a kind of a moderate message, and they get in charge. The first thing they do is redraw all the districts and make it 10-1 Democrat.
Yeah, and then smirk about it.
Yeah,
while they do.
It was like 6-5. It was 6-5 either the Democrat or Republican, but nonetheless, it was a basically 50-50 split on a congressional breakdown. And they do 10-1.
Right.
10-1 Democrats estimated to take over the Virginia delegation.
Yeah. Virginia is now a shade of blue we don't even have a name for. That's how blue they've gone in just the last few months.
Yeah, and they don't play games. They're like, this is what we have to do to get power. Boom, let's do it. Take power.
Right. And that's I don't even understand why the moderate Dems continue to fall for the whole moderate sound.
Right.
because they're sold this kind of stuff. I mean, we were told as Americans that Joe Biden was the moderate candidate and we needed to
Right.
have him as the nominee and
We
not
were
Bernie
told that.
Sanders.
Yeah.
And then he gets in there and he expands access to abortion and
They're
all these
all the
other
same.
things. Oh,
They're all the same.
I mean, literally. And they've sold people a bill of goods for decades, and people keep electing them. You know, it's interesting. You talk about how, like, historically, the sitting president, his party loses seats in the midterm elections historically, and it is odd because I did the numbers here. Roughly, we've had 11 elections in my lifetime, presidential elections. 3 times a Republican presidential candidate has won the popular vote: 84, 2004, and 2024.
Yep.
Why would we go from a popular vote president losing seats in the midterm elections? I don't know. But certainly the media has done its job and will continue to pump these Democratic
so
messages.
you're
out.
saying that Reagan, or was that HW in 84?
84 was Reagan. That's when he took Mondale to the
So Reagan and Bush won popular vote, you're saying?
They did, yes.
Yeah,
and then,
that's an interesting trend.
And
I
then
see what
Trump,
you're doing here.
Trump won. Bobby remembers 84.
and
he
they
lost
also-
Minnesota, but some people say he got robbed there.
They also, yeah. If you go too far back in history, I'm out of the conversation. You and Bobby can carry.
I've
this
only
on.
read about that in a history book. I don't remember it
I can
myself.
go back to the 80s. That's
Yeah,
about it.
okay.
But that's interesting, an interesting analysis. So, I wonder who kept Congress after those, because didn't Bush?
Yeah.
Bush is one of the only. Bush and Clinton were the ones to defy
Correct.
kind of the midterm curse.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, to be fair, like Democrats keep selling people a bill of goods, but also Republicans, because Republicans ran on things like the life issue, and for a brief moment during Bush's presidency, they had a supermajority, and even Trump's first term in office, and abortion was still the law of the land. So to be fair, Republicans also claim they're going to do things that they don't back up once they're in.
Yeah, and I think they need to, because look, the Democrats, they were this close, for those watching on camera. They were within like a millimeter of getting rid of that filibuster.
Mm-hmm.
There were like 1 or 2 Democrat holdouts
Right.
in the Senate that were like, oh, no, we're not doing this. But you let this keep going, mark my word, we will look back and at this moment and say, yeah, we saw that coming. We saw the Democrats getting rid of the filibuster, passing anything and everything they want to pass in the name of their radical agenda.
And then,
it will happen.
Yeah, and then using their friends in the media to convince people that this is the right and the patriotic and the democratic thing to do.
You know what? I think whatever bad they pass, now it depends on what they pass, but I might be willing to accept that.
Mm-hmm.
If the Democrats get rid of this fake filibuster and then we get back in charge and reverse whatever terrible thing they passed, but now we can pass legislation with 51 votes,
Yeah.
I might actually be thanking the Democrats. Depends on what they pass. We'll see. But we've got to get this legislature working. We've got to get the legislative branch working again. They're the ones who are supposed to be holding everybody accountable, including the executive and the judicial. Hey, Chris, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
All right, folks, check out AFN, American Family News, afn.net.